Hello everyone, my name's Simon Turner and I'm the Engagement Manager for Driving for Better Business, the award-winning free program from National Highways. Our mission is to help employers understand their legal responsibilities and good practice relating to the management of driver safety, and that includes the safety of our younger drivers. In this presentation, I'm going to be talking about how employers can safely introduce young van drivers to the roads. The increased risks for young van drivers in relation to driving for work came on our radar about 18 months ago, when we began talking to and working with a number of employers in the DFBB community who were working very hard at the time to minimise this risk. This led to the development of a new DFBB resource to determine why the risks were higher for young drivers and what employers should be doing. The guide also looks at what we call novice or inexperienced van drivers of any age, as they're also at increased risk with many of the same factors involved. The guide can be downloaded for free at drivingforbetterbusiness.com/support. Now, many people think of young drivers as simply 17-year-old learners, or maybe those that just passed their test at 18 or 19. It's often therefore not a subject that's on many employers' radars. But as the young driver age bracket is 17 to 24, this means that apprentices and graduates all fall into this category, as well as many delivery drivers. What we're basically doing is asking young drivers to jump in a van which is bigger, handles differently, and is subject to different rules to anything they've driven before. This is clearly a significant foreseeable risk, when we already know that 1 in 5 of all KSIs involve a young driver, and young males, and the vast majority of van drivers are male, young males are 4 times more likely to be killed or seriously injured. 2 of the employers we worked with to develop the guide were SP Electricity Northwest, whose young drivers were averaging 3 collisions each month, and Northern Power Grid, who also had identified significantly higher collision rates for their young drivers. Alistair Heyman-Start from Electricity Northwest and John Wilkinson from Northern Power Grid will be discussing what they did in more detail for you at the end of this presentation, alongside Mark Cartwright from National Highways, whose team put the guide together. So, what are the key risk factors for young drivers? The first is that they have limited driving experience. The DVLA tells us the average learner completes 45 hours of lessons and 22 hours of private practice. But there's no minimum on-road experience required, so 2 drivers with the same licence can have vastly different levels of experience. We know that young people's brains aren't fully developed until their mid to late 20s, so their perception of risk and decision-making abilities aren't yet fully formed. They also have different circadian rhythms, usually going to sleep later and waking later, and that creates additional fatigue risk if they're put on an early shift pattern. We know phone distraction is a problem with younger drivers, and as we'll see in a few minutes, risky driving is likely to increase along with vehicle confidence. Someone who's never driven a van before is presented with a range of new and unsettling challenges. A van has poorer visibility, larger blind spots, and, of course, no rear view mirror. They're much bigger and need more room to manoeuvre. The braking and handling are different to a car, and they're different again between being loaded or unloaded. The driver is sitting higher up, so the perception of speed is different. Different speed limits apply on some roads. And the van is likely to have different safety technology to the driver's personal car. A new driver may have come to rely on certain safety systems in their car, and these systems, these safety nets, may not be present at all in their new van. Now, I said that risky driving is likely to increase along with vehicle confidence. Confidence, as we know, increases over time. The driver might begin to think, I've been driving this for a couple of weeks now and I've got the hang of it. But true competence, the genuine ability to react correctly and immediately in any given situation, takes much longer. And that gap between confidence and competence is where drivers become overconfident, they fail to identify risk properly and start to revert to habits from their car driving. So that misplaced confidence often leads to higher speeds and following the vehicle in front more closely. Looking at the companies we spoke to when creating the guide, there was an obvious framework of good practice that started to appear, with 3 levels, and each level building on top of the previous one. Tier 1 is for all drivers, whatever their age, who are new to vans. It's the very minimum we should be expecting, and it requires a comprehensive vehicle induction, driver profiling and assessment, and familiarisation with a driving for work policy. It also, importantly, requires a basic telematics monitoring system in the vehicle. Tier 2 builds on this with a permit to drive system, and I'm going to discuss some of these individual things in greater detail over the next few slides. We need a comprehensive training program covering vehicle handling, slow speed manoeuvring, and knowledge about speed limits and safe loading. And there should be a period where the new driver is paired with a mentor or buddy. The idea is that the new driver should not be out on the road solo during this period. Regular coaching conversations should be had with the driver, which is why the telematics system is so important. Those coaching conversations need to be based around real data, or they just become subjective and much less effective. Tier 3 then includes the enhanced controls that we put in place to address the specific risks for our young drivers. Extended training delivered using a distributed model, and I'll cover this in more detail in a moment. Then we also have additional training elements where required and regular refresher training. So looking at a few of these elements in more detail, let's start with a permit to drive. It's basically like an additional driving license specifically for that company with a higher threshold for obtaining it. Industry good practice says this should include a driver assessment, an induction workshop, a minimum of 2 days vehicle familiarisation and training with a pass or fail at the end of it. We need an eyesight test, and it should also have a minimum entry requirement in terms of the driver having held their licence for a minimum period and having no serious convictions or a limit on penalty points. Employers then also need a system to deal with revoking licences and provide an additional training should our new driver display a fall in standards. Vehicle inductions need to include all the controls and ADAS safety technology that might be on the van, including how it operates and, importantly, what its limitations are. The driver needs to know how and why the van handles differently to a car. It needs to know where different speed limits apply, how to ensure safe and secure loading, and how to conduct a daily pre-use safety check. Distributed training is possibly the most important element of what we learned from the case studies, especially for young drivers. Many companies operate an intensive 2-day induction, after which their drivers are sent out on their own. Our 2 case studies proved this didn't work, especially for young drivers. Distributed training is the method of splitting the training up, usually into a series of half-day chunks delivered over a period of weeks. The method delivers better retention as it doesn't overload drivers and allows drivers to process the information better between sessions. Real-world driving between those sessions also allows the training to make more sense and for questions to be raised at the next session to help understanding. If you're choosing mentors, this is a really important decision to get right. You need to ensure those selected to be mentors are safe drivers themselves, consistently safe, they're patient, good communicators, and willing to challenge unsafe behaviour. Mentoring should be a minimum of 6 weeks for all new van drivers, but extended up to as much as 6 months for under 25s, with no solo driving during this period. Mentors also need to be supported with training and feedback themselves. And with good drivers in short supply, this is actually a way of providing a decent career development path for those drivers who you really value. The most important aspect of any safety culture is that nothing will be achieved if new drivers see more experienced drivers flouting policies or cutting corners. They must see all drivers following the rules and feel safe to raise concerns if they've got them. When issues do arise, learn from them and communicate the findings. Don't simply look to apportion blame. So, getting back to our two case studies, SP Electricity Northwest found their apprentices were having 3 collisions a month. They instigated distributed training with 4 weekly half-day sessions. They got professional trainers in to deliver classroom workshops that focus on their main concerns, such as mobile phone distraction. They got experts in to explain the science behind cognitive development, and they even got parents of young collision victims to come in and speak to their apprentices. The result was that 11 months later, which is when the case study was written and included in our new guide, their apprentices hadn't been involved in a single collision. The changes to their induction program were clearly effective, preventing a further 33 collisions that were likely to have happened during that period. Northern Powergrid also moved their training for all new van drivers to a distributed model spread out over 6 weeks, with each driver paired with a mentor during that time. For young drivers, this mentoring period was extended to the full 6 months. In order to qualify for their permit to drive on behalf of Northern Powergrid, young drivers must have already held their full licence for 2 years. They must have had less than 7 points and must not have had any convictions for motoring offences for things like mobile phone use or drink or drug driving. All drivers were also mandated to attend a slow-speed van manoeuvring course. The results? Improved driver telematics scores across the whole business and a further reduction in collisions for what is already a very well-run fleet. So, to wrap up, the research into what companies are currently doing to minimise the risk to their young drivers distills down into 5 core sections. Implement a permit to drive system with clear entry requirements and a process to revoke the licence if standards aren't met. Provide comprehensive vehicle training. Use a distributed training program delivering half-day modules over 4 to 6 weeks. Monitor behaviour and use telematics data as the basis for coaching, rewarding improvement as you go. And finally, establish a mentoring or buddy system with no solo driving throughout the period. That's the end of this short presentation. If you'd like to download the DFBB guide to managing young and inexperienced van drivers, you can do so at drivingforbetterbusiness.com/support, or you can email us on support@drivingforbetterbusiness.com if you have any queries. Now I'll hand back to James, who's going to host a discussion on some of the key points that I brought out in this presentation. Thanks for listening.